Most people think decluttering means emptying closets or filling a dozen trash bags. For me, it all changed with one tiny fix, a decision so small it almost felt silly, but it completely reshaped my life after 60. The truth is, clutter doesn't arrive in one big wave. It sneaks in a little at a time, until your home feels heavier than you do. That's why so many of us never start. We look at the mail on the counter, the boxes in the corner, the clothes we haven't worn in years, and it feels like the mountain is too high to climb. But here's the surprise, you don't need to climb it. You only need one step. That's what I discovered, and that's what I want to show you. Because if one small fix could give me back freedom in my own home, it can do the same for you. And after 60, don't we all deserve homes that lift us up instead of weighing us down? Before I tell you what I changed, let me ask you, does your home ever feel heavier than it should? If you said yes, take a second to like this video and subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors. What I'm about to share isn't about throwing everything out. It's about finding the one simple place to begin, the spark that can shift your whole life. I had just stepped into my 60s when I realized my home didn't feel the same anymore. It wasn't that it became cluttered overnight, it crept in slowly, in ways I barely noticed. A magazine I meant to read later, a drawer of greeting cards I couldn't throw away, souvenirs from vacations that lived in boxes instead of on shelves. Year after year, those little somedays built up until the rooms around me felt less like living spaces and more like archives of every stage of my life. What I came to understand is that clutter at this age isn't just about objects. It's about history. Every pile carries a story, every closet feels like a doorway into decisions I'd been postponing. Do I hold on to the extra sets of linens no one uses? Should I keep the kitchen gadgets I bought but rarely touch? What about all the paperwork tucked into folders, each one whispering that it might matter? It wasn't laziness that kept me from starting, it was the weight of choices that all felt too heavy at once. On the surface, my house looked fine. If a neighbor stopped by, they'd probably think it was tidy enough. But I knew the truth. I knew which cabinet I avoided opening. I knew which hallway felt cramped because of things I kept shifting around. And with that awareness came a kind of quiet exhaustion, as though I was living with a backpack full of to-dos strapped to me every day. The hardest part was how it affected my confidence. I used to be the kind of person who loved hosting, holidays, coffee with friends, Sunday dinners. But slowly, I began turning down invitations or avoiding extending them, because I didn't want anyone to see the weight I was carrying inside these walls. Even with family, I caught myself pushing items out of the way instead of enjoying the moment. I remember standing in the middle of my living room one day and thinking, is this it? Is this how I'll spend the rest of my years, walking around piles, feeling the press of objects I don't even use, convincing myself it's too late to make a change? That thought hurt more than the clutter itself. What shifted everything was realizing I wasn't powerless, I was simply overwhelmed. I didn't need to clear decades in one weekend. I needed one beginning, one small step that told me change was still possible. That realization was like a light switching on. The burden wasn't that I couldn't handle it. The burden was believing I had to do it all at once. And once I gave myself permission to start small, the heaviness began to lift in ways I hadn't imagined. The turning point in my journey didn't come from filling garbage bags or moving heavy boxes around the house until my back ached. It came from something so small it almost felt laughable at first. I created one rule for myself. Every single item that came through my door had to be met with a decision right away. No exceptions. No, I'll set this here for now. No piles to deal with later. If it entered my home, it had to keep moving until it reached its rightful place. That meant if I came in with groceries, the bags were unpacked immediately. If I brought in the mail, it was sorted at once, recycling, filing, or acting on it that very day. Even something as simple as taking off a jacket required a decision: hang it up, put it in the laundry, or store it properly. At first, this rule felt strict, almost like I was being unreasonably hard on myself. But what I didn't realize at the time was how much power this gave me. It stopped clutter at its very source. Things no longer had the chance to linger, to spread, or to silently multiply when I wasn't paying attention. Within just a few days, the difference was startling. I noticed that surfaces stayed clear without me even trying. Rooms felt easier to move through. Most of all, I felt a shift in myself. For years, my default had been postponement, telling myself I would get to things later. Later never seemed to come, and that habit of delay was exactly what had built the piles in the first place. By forcing myself to decide in the moment, I wasn't just tidying. I was breaking the pattern that had weighed me down for decades. What surprised me most was how freeing this one fix felt. It wasn't about perfection, and it certainly wasn't about throwing everything away. It was about becoming deliberate in the tiniest ways, and those tiny ways built trust with myself again. For the first time in years, I had proof that I could stay ahead of clutter instead of always chasing it. That one habit reminded me that I was still capable of creating order, of being the gatekeeper of my own home. This rule didn't just keep objects moving. It kept me moving, too. It reminded me that change doesn't require massive effort all at once. Sometimes, it's one small but consistent action that turns the tide. And once I felt that shift, I knew I had the foundation I needed to finally move forward with confidence. The change started with one small fix, but what happened next felt almost like a quiet revolution in my daily life. I didn't expect it, but that single shift sparked a ripple that carried into places I hadn't even connected to clutter before. What I noticed first was how my mornings changed. Instead of walking into the kitchen and being met with scattered distractions that demanded decisions before I'd even had my coffee, I walked into calm. That calm set the tone for the day. I brewed my coffee in peace, I had space to actually sit with a crossword or my Bible for a few minutes, and I found myself easing into the morning instead of rushing through it. One clear space gave me a rhythm that was gentler, and suddenly I wasn't starting the day already tired. From there, my meals became different too. Before, I often leaned on convenience, microwaving something, eating standing up, or picking at snacks because preparing food felt like a hassle in a messy environment. But once the space felt open, I started enjoying cooking again. I had counters to work on, I wasn't moving things out of the way just to slice an apple, and that freedom made me want to prepare healthier meals. I wasn't just feeding myself, I was nourishing myself in a way I hadn't in years. For seniors, that small change makes a huge difference. Eating real meals isn't only about nutrition, it's about dignity and self-care, about reminding yourself you're still worth that effort. Another surprise was music. For years, I had fallen out of the habit of turning on the radio or playing my old records. It wasn't a conscious choice, it was that the background noise of clutter drowned out the joy of it. But once the environment lightened, I wanted to hear music again. I'd turn on a jazz station in the morning or play gospel while cooking, and it transformed chores into something I could actually enjoy. That tiny spark of sound lifted my spirits, and I realized how much clutter had stolen those small pleasures without me even noticing. And then there were my hobbies. My puzzles had been tucked away because the table was never clear enough. My paint sat unopened because I didn't want to deal with dragging everything out and putting it all back. But with space reclaimed, I started to reach for those things again. The joy of sitting down to something purely for me, not a task, not a responsibility, but something creative or playful, returned like an old friend. It wasn't just about filling time. It was about reclaiming a sense of identity beyond keeping up with the house. What I learned is this: clutter doesn't just block surfaces, it blocks experiences. One small fix didn't just give me order, it gave me back mornings that felt calm, meals that felt intentional, music that felt alive, and hobbies that reminded me who I was before the piles took over. The more I saw how one change brought joy back into daily life, the more I wanted that feeling everywhere. It wasn't about a spotless home. It was about living again in ways I didn't know I'd been missing. The deeper I went, the more I realized clutter wasn't just what I could see on shelves and tables. The real weight was hiding in my calendar, in the routines I kept out of habit, and in promises I carried long after they stopped making sense. Once I fixed that one small thing at home, I started to see the same patterns in the way I lived my days. My calendar was the first place it showed up. At a glance, I told myself I wasn't that busy, but every week, little commitments were stacked like bricks. A church committee I no longer enjoyed, a club I attended out of obligation, a neighbor I always said yes to when she needed a ride. None of these things were wrong, but together, they left me drained. What I realized was this: my time had become cluttered the same way my house had. Too much in, not enough being cleared out. Just as I stopped letting papers pile up, I gave myself permission to stop letting my calendar fill with things that didn't truly matter to me anymore. Then there were the habits. I had dozens of tiny routines that seemed harmless but kept feeding the clutter cycle. Saving every plastic bag just in case. Keeping expired coupons in a drawer because I didn't want to waste them. Turning on the shopping channel out of boredom, which almost always led to buying something I didn't need. None of those habits felt heavy on their own, but they created invisible clutter that stole both space and energy. Breaking them was like unclogging a drain. Suddenly everything flowed more smoothly. The hardest part, though, was letting go of old promises. These weren't promises anyone was holding me to anymore, but they sat heavy in my mind. The promise to finally finish photo albums I had left half done. The promise to hold on to boxes of heirlooms until the kids wanted them, even though they had politely said they didn't. The promise to reconnect with friends I hadn't spoken to in a decade, yet kept on a mental list that only made me feel guilty. These promises were like unopened boxes in a closet, each one taking up emotional space, each one whispering you should every time I thought of them. It was only when I began treating these invisible weights the same way I treated physical clutter that I felt the difference. Just as I cleared off my counter, I cleared my calendar. Just as I stopped keeping junk mail, I stopped keeping habits that drained me. Just as I donated items I no longer used, I let go of promises that no longer matched the life I was living now. And in doing so, I discovered something powerful. Clutter isn't really about stuff. It's about unmade decisions. Every object, every appointment, every old commitment you don't face is another decision left hanging over you. When I began making those decisions instead of postponing them, I felt a freedom I hadn't known in years. My time became my own. My routine stopped working against me. My heart felt lighter because I wasn't carrying the weight of someday on my shoulders. Clearing those hidden layers of clutter didn't just change my home, it gave me back ownership of my life. When I cleared those hidden layers, something surprising happened. The changes didn't stay tucked away in my calendar or my habits. They spilled right back into my physical world, setting off a cascade of improvements that made my everyday life easier and safer in ways I hadn't expected. The first shift was safety. For years, I had learned to work around the clutter. Shoes by the doorway, a folded chair in the hallway, or grocery bags waiting to be unpacked, I tiptoed past them without thinking much about it. But when I began clearing with purpose, those little obstacles disappeared. Suddenly, I could walk from the bedroom to the bathroom at night without holding my breath or shuffling like I was on an obstacle course. The peace of knowing I wasn't one misstep away from a bad fall gave me more confidence than I can describe. After 60, safety isn't a small thing, it's the foundation for independence. The second shift was how easy cleaning became. Before, dusting and vacuuming felt like moving mountains. I had to lift piles, shift boxes, and bend more than my back really allowed. It wasn't the cleaning itself that wore me out, it was the clutter in the way. But once I lightened the load, cleaning became simple. A quick wipe down, a few passes with the vacuum, and the room looked fresh. That gave me energy back, because I wasn't spending it all on workarounds. It reminded me that sometimes clutter doesn't just take up space, it steals the very energy we need to care for ourselves. The third shift touched my budget. With less clutter, I stopped wasting money on duplicates. I can't tell you how many times I used to buy tape, light bulbs, or another bottle of cleaning spray because I couldn't find the one I already had. Clearing things out meant I knew what I owned and where it was. I wasn't buying replacements out of frustration. That small change saved me money each month, which I could put toward things that added joy, like treating the grandkids or planning a small trip. And then came the shift in independence. When my home felt lighter, I didn't need to call on my daughter to help me move heavy boxes just to get to something I needed. I didn't avoid chores because I knew they'd leave me too tired to do anything else. I could handle my own space again, and that sense of capability was priceless. Independence isn't only about living alone or paying your bills, It's about feeling strong enough to manage your own home without fear or frustration. It was never about stripping my house bare. It was about creating an environment that worked with me, not against me. A clear entry gave me safety. Lighter rooms made cleaning a breeze. Fewer objects saved me money. And every step made me feel stronger in my independence. One small fix had started a chain reaction, and that cascade of change reshaped the way I lived every single day. For the first time in years, I invited friends over without apologizing. No excuses, no nervous laugh about the mess, no rushing to hide things in the bedroom. I simply opened the door, welcomed them in, and felt proud of what I was sharing. That moment was more than just a gathering. It was the moment I realized my home wasn't holding me back anymore. It was giving something back to me. The biggest payoff of decluttering wasn't the space itself, but what that space allowed me to experience. When my environment felt lighter, I could finally give my full attention to the people around me. I could sit at the table with friends and not have my mind distracted by the piles I used to push aside. I could laugh freely, enjoy the moment, and truly connect. That kind of presence is something clutter quietly steals from us, and I didn't see it until it returned. With family, the change was just as powerful. My grandkids could spread out their puzzles on the living room floor without me worrying about what they might knock over. We cooked together in a kitchen that finally had room to move. Instead of constantly managing my home while they visited, I was able to simply enjoy them. And I could see the difference in their eyes. They weren't stepping into a house full of things, they were stepping into a place that welcomed them. What also surprised me was how my sense of identity came rushing back. For years, I felt buried under stuff, as though my home spoke more about my past than about who I was now. But as the rooms opened, I began filling them with moments instead of objects. Music played more often, hobbies came back out, laughter echoed in the spaces that once felt heavy. My home wasn't a museum of everything I'd held onto, it became a living reflection of who I am today. And maybe the most precious payoff of all was the sense of belonging. When I walked into gatherings at church or welcomed neighbors inside, I no longer carried the quiet shame of if only they knew what my house looked like. That weight lifted, and in its place came pride, not in perfection, but in authenticity. My home was ready to be shared, and that made me feel connected again, part of something larger than myself. The personal payoff wasn't measured in empty shelves or tidy closets. It was measured in laughter around the table, in freedom to host without fear, in time with loved ones that wasn't clouded by distraction. It was the feeling of stepping fully into life again. My home felt like mine, and because of that, I felt like me again. If I could change my whole life by fixing one small habit, you can too. I know how impossible it feels when you look around and see clutter that seems to touch every corner of your home. It feels like starting would take more energy than you have, and finishing feels like a mountain you can't climb. That's exactly how I felt. But here's the truth, you don't need to conquer it all. You just need to begin with one thing that's been quietly bothering you. One habit. One corner. One change that tells your brain, I am in control again. That's the real secret. When you give yourself proof that you can manage one thing, you create momentum without forcing it. You don't need the perfect day or a whole weekend set aside. You don't need new storage bins or expensive systems. What you need is the courage to take one action, to fix one habit that no longer serves you. Maybe for you it's the stack of papers on the end table. Maybe it's the shoes by the doorway that you always trip over. Maybe it's the box in the closet you've been avoiding for 10 years. Whatever it is, when you face that one thing, the rest begins to fall into place almost on its own. Your home should protect you, not weigh you down. It should be a place where you can breathe easily, move safely, and welcome people in without fear or shame. And I promise you, all it takes to start moving toward that freedom is one small fix. Not perfection. Not a full house purge. Just one choice that breaks the cycle of letting things pile up. So if you've been waiting for the right moment, let this be it. You don't need to do everything. You just need to do something. And when you do, you'll feel the same spark I did. The spark that changes not just your home, but the way you live inside it. If this gave you hope, hit like, share it with a friend over 60, and subscribe, because your next chapter deserves to feel lighter, freer, and beautifully yours.